Hey everyone. Today I want to talk about something I came across this week, or this past week, I should say. As you all know, AI is becoming a pretty popular thing, right? It's all you hear about nowadays, especially within, products having new features, right? Everything wants to have an AI capability, of some sort. And, you have to admit, sometimes it does get a little bit annoying, right? This week, though, I found something pretty interesting. I was looking through some articles as per usual, and I basically found a piece of malware that was caught in the wild, basically using an API with to interact with a large language model (LLM) in order to execute commands, basically on a call. This is a pretty cool kind of example. I'm not saying it's cool to do it, but it's a pretty cool execution of how basically utilizing AI as a tool, you can use it for basically nefarious purposes. Now, basically, this article kind of outlines here that Ukraine's cyber incident response team, CERT UA, is what they call it. They were basically discovering some things, and they were alerted that it was attributed to a couple, Russian state-backed groups, like Fancy Bear, Send It, Pawn Storm, a couple of those, right? Basically, though, the malware in particular, in this case, is written in Python and uses Hugging Face's API, and Hugging Face is basically a platform from what I know, where you can kind of download or utilize, different AI, large language models. It's meant to kind of be sort of like an open source, crowdsource type thing. Where you can kind of grab different LLMs that people upload or even companies, publish under like different open source licenses, right? Well, in this case, the LLM here, basically in this instance, was being used with a basically packaged software altogether, right? Basically, the LameHug, I guess what they're calling malware, is being distributed via email chain in a zip attachment that pretty much would, basically have the LameHub loader upon extraction. Basically, what they would do is basically once you would extract the zip, install the program right on your computer. What it would do is basically the LameHug, I guess what we're calling it, that it would utilize the LM to kind of come up with its own types of, I guess, data theft and spyware commands, which is honestly pretty cool because then at that point, right, there's not really, I guess you could say, ways to, when you're scanning through code, sometimes if like Defender or whatever, I guess AV you're using, right, if it scans through code and it sees a bunch of stuff like, take this data and send it out to this web server, or, elevate privileges here, do this, right? But it's kind of interesting when, in this case, when it would scan through the code, the LLM would just kind of see, like, basically the AV, excuse me, would see that you're making calls out to an LLM, which could be fine, right? It could be, functionality for a basic application, right? But in this case, the program is using, calls out to through the API to the LLM to kind of generate those commands on demand, which basically you would have to have something, basically scanning, I guess, at execution or at runtime, which is possible, but again, it could make it a little bit harder to detect, right? It's not as opposed to just having straight code, be there within the terminal or however this command is being executed. In my opinion, this is like a pretty unique implementation. I know it doesn't seem really, that hard, that difficult here to do, but this is a pretty neat idea, right? I can easily see how things could go sideways, depending on what kind of antivirus provider you use or endpoint solution, or even if you're using antivirus at all, right? This could be pretty scary, and I won't be surprised in the future, right, if we see more of these types of things. This is kind of, just the beginning here, right? AI is, keeps getting bigger and bigger, but now, in the past, we've seen some basically nefarious, like, GPT models. I know last year, it was the year before, there was, when Chat GPT was, obviously like the main AI right at first, right, that came out. There was a thing called Worm GPT, which is basically like a darknet, basically like an explicit version of ChatGPT where you could ask it basically, to just write like ransomware and have it do certain things, and there's no restrictions, right? It was basically like the training wheels are off. So from here on out, these types of things are probably more common, but this is a very unique example, or not unique, very interesting, I should say, example of how basically you can use an LLM to kind of do the work for you and come up with those commands. And hopefully, you could probably say like, make a list of commands to do this, but also make sure that doesn't, alert the antivirus, like, kind of obfuscated in some sort of way so that, basically the AV engine or, is not seeing it there. But let me know what you guys think down below. I think this is pretty interesting, and I will probably see more of this stuff in the future. But unfortunately, that's all I have time for today. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.